insanity. This is also a matter of personal taste, but in my opinion, the greatest amount of growth showcased between these releases is found in the B-sides. Not growth concept-wise, as 17 Carats B-sides are way more mature than the 3 releases after it, but growth in actual music quality. Again, my opinion, but 17 Carats B-sides are much less memorable than everything that came after it. Boys B has a few memorable B-sides like Rock and Fronting.
Girl, rock my head, rock my head, rock my head, rock my head, rock my head. You take me to the top and street down like a gyro drop.
And the quality just explodes with their first full album, Love and Letter. Still Lonely, hit songs, Say Yes, Drift Away, some of which are actually remastered pre-debut songs. All of them are hailed by the fandom for their quality and even recognizable out of the fandom. This trend of quality B-sides continues into the repackage with iconic tracks like Simple and Healing and Love Letter. Love and Letter also marks the introduction of the units, which were a concept before but not utilized until now. Although it was just rearrangements of songs on the album, it gave a taste of the direction 17 would actually end up taking with the units. Although Boom Boom could arguably be lumped in with the releases before this in terms of theme, overall, Going 17 marked a huge change in sound for them. It was much more mature than their previous work, and not in a darker way or more sultry way. The B-sides had much more soul and feeling to them, and they were slower and more emotional than their previous work by a long shot.
함께라서 웃을 수 있고 너라서 울 수도 있어.
It was definitely a good time to start this transition, as many viewed Love and Letter as the absolute best extension of how far you could take a fresh concept. Also, Going 17 marks the first appearance of what has become one of 17's calling cards, the proper original unit songs. And boy does this tradition start with a bang. Highlight, Lean on Me, and Don't Listen in Secret showcase each subunit's specialty perfectly while keeping with the theme of the overall album.
내가 네 맘에 있다면 정말 내가 네 맘에 있다면 너가 어디에 있든 I will follow you.
Although Going 17 marked another improvement from their previous release in terms of sales, I don't think any of them were prepared for this smash hit they were about to release that was AL1. This took the whole emotional and soulful concept explored in Going 17 to its natural extension, with the emotion-packed Don't Wanna Cry serving as the perfect title track to an even more perfect album. Don't Wanna Cry is infectiously catchy while still evoking emotion, so it's really no wonder that it's still their most popular title track to this day. Overall, these 2 albums mark the first big change in 17's sound, a chance for them to explore new genres and themes without the restrictions that keeping a fresh concept forever might bring. Now, you can probably see a pattern starting to emerge. 17 explore a concept to all its corners and then move on to something else. Since they've pretty much covered both ends of the emotional spectrum at this point, it'd make the most sense for their next albums to land somewhere in the middle. Despite all their differences, at this point, 17's music had already developed some commonalities, being ridiculously catchy and having insane production value, the latter of which was made all the more impressive because they are self-producing. Don't Wanna Cry was an absolute smash hit. There's not a K-pop stan that hasn't heard that song, so it was very important that their next title track lived up to that and showed a new side of them. And Clap most certainly delivered. It's just as, if not more, iconic than Don't Wanna Cry. It was pretty much the polar opposite in terms of concept. It was a true recipe for success. The teenage B-sides, unlike the albums before it, don't stick to one concept or vibe. They cross pretty much every genre in the book while still keeping those 2 factors I talked about before, being catchy and having insane production value. If 17 were big before this, at this point they were unstoppable. Teenage released all of their potential, and following things up with Director's Cut and Thanks, which was once again the polar opposite of Clap, and included 4 fantastic and wildly different B-sides that are all praised in and out of the fandom for their quality. At this point, 17 had truly made a name for themselves on almost every front possible for an idol group. From talent to music to variety skills, 17 were known far and wide for having it all. So all they really needed to do was maintain their music quality for their next 3 releases. They didn't really need a huge amount of musical exploration, and I think You Make My Day was designed to do just that, to maintain. The You Make My Day album and Oh My in particular are like a huge callback to their Fresh Teen days, looked at from a more mature perspective, and with the beautifully written and introspective Our Dawn is Hotter Than Day to top things off, it was one of summer 2018's biggest hits. The actual music, combined with other factors like SNS freedom, drew in a huge amount of fans, and You Made My Dawn marked 17's biggest jump in sales since debut. A complete contrast from the refreshing vibes and overall excitement of You Made My Day, You Made My Dawn is slower and, in their own words, had a more homey or cozy vibe to it to fit the winter season. Home, the suitably named title track, was obviously written as a love letter to the fans. It was easy on the ears and contained some seriously heart-wrenching moments. They didn't even need to experiment at this point, and yet they had brought something very new to the table for boy groups, and Home remains one of their most well-known titles to this day. Once again, You Make My Dawn brought in a ton of fans, and then 17 kind of fell off the map for a while. September 2019. 17 announces their 3rd full album in Ode. Looking at their history, full albums typically showcase some of their most impressive work as a group, so obviously people were excited. The pre-release single, Hit, drops, and for once, 17 actually followed a trend. Hit was exciting and performed in suit jackets with no shirt underneath and had chanting noises in an entirely synthetic post-chorus, all characteristics of other popular boy group releases that year. The thing is, 17 did it better than everybody else, and as such, an Ode marked a sort of new wave for 17. Instead of reaching out and exploring concepts and doing something different all the time, they just do what everybody else is doing, but make it uniquely 17, and pump up all those things that make 17, well, 17. Fear on the full album was a completely new concept for 17, but something other boy groups were already doing well before them. Whether you think they truly perfected the dark concept is up to you, but there is no denying that an Ode skyrocketed them from famous to famous. It sold nearly 1 million copies, the people were eating it up, and not for no reason either. As Billboard eloquently put it, it's an homage to 17's thoughts and artistry. Tracks like Lucky and Snapshoot call back to their earlier days. Lie Again and Fear are wildly introspective and really let us get a look at their thoughts as artists, and the unit songs showcase each unit's talents perfectly. Back It Up is the action-packed free-for-all that everybody was waiting for Hip Hop Unit to release. Second Life contains some of the most iconic writing and melodic moments of their entire career, and 24/7 lets the performance unit actually sing. Mail is finally dead, and Ming Hao is singing, and it's beautiful. Okay, the Ode was really great, it drew in a huge amount of fans, but that wouldn't really show itself until their next release. And that brings us up to this year. 17 had a whopping 4 comebacks this year, 2 in Japan and 2 in Korea, but I'll only be covering Korean releases, even though I think Fallen Flower is one of the best things they've ever put out. Like I mentioned earlier, an Ode skyrocketed 17's popularity tremendously, and Hengare was their first album to sell over 1 million copies. The commonalities between Left and Right and Home Run are numerous, but the first thing I want to point out is that neither of these albums contain songs in their usual position units. Hingare is entirely OT13 songs, and Semicolon's units are all done by birth year instead of position. I personally think this was a really good move. 17 have done units outside of their assigned ones in the past, and it's something that's pretty necessary in a group that large. By temporarily ditching the usual units, it opens up more combinations of members and thus more room for musical exploration. The second thing I want to point out is that both of their 2020 releases are much more laid back. And what I mean by that is that up until this point, 17 had been very well known for their insane synchronization and tight choreo. Left and Right and Home Run are more laid back in that they don't need to be insanely synchronized, and they give more room for each individual member to shine and show their own charms. Hingare's strengths are most obvious in its B-sides, which are all both vastly different from each other and widely agreed to be some of their best work. Keedle, in particular, was incredibly popular, and a lot of people actually think that's 17's best song now. It's incredible that even this late in their careers, they're still outdoing themselves, they're still pulling in new fans, and they haven't burnt themselves out at all, and Hingare is a huge testament to that. Overall, music-wise, like I said earlier, 17 followed the retro trend this year. This is most obvious in Semicolon and Home Run in particular, but there's traces of it in Left and Right as well. Remember how I said earlier that new units would open up new routes for musical exploration? Well, Semicolon. The two unit songs that stick out the most for me and many others are Light a Flame and Hey Buddy. Light a Flame is obviously meant to be the sexy song, with trumpets and Latin undertones in a slower tempo all combined to create this sense of maturity that's perfect for the 96 minors. Hey Buddy is the complete opposite, blaring trumpets and 7 chords everywhere and just complete and utter jazz. It's something that 17 hadn't really tried up until this point, and once again, it's incredible how they keep finding new directions to go in, even though they're almost a 6-year-old group. 17 are one of the few groups in K-pop whose music isn't defined by a certain genre or concept, but literally by just being good. People outside of the fandom, people that don't even listen to K-pop that much, know that 17's music is good. Over their nearly 6 years as a group, 17 have grown immensely music-wise, from their pretty much exclusively bright and peppy early days to their emo phase, and of course to every nook and cranny of what K-pop music has to offer. 17 has it all, has a song for everybody, and the fact that they built this all for themselves from the ground makes it all the more impressive.